Welcome to the BudsNReality show. I'm Sean Collins, the guy with a lot to say, and I'm here with a very special guest, my first author as a guest, Derek Wills. Thank you very much for coming on this show, man. This is very cool. Very cool to
I
have you.
appreciate you having me very much. It's been a minute since I've been on somebody else's show, and it's good to talk to people.
Absolutely, absolutely. I actually have a great time doing this. It's cool to meet, new people, different people, hear different ideas. It's been very cool. I've been doing this for a little over a year now, but I'm finally back from a month-long hiatus because I had to get, sliced and diced by the healthcare system. But
Well, you're doing better. That's the key thing.
I am on the up and up finally. It's been quite the journey. Someday I'll talk about it on a show. I have kind of a natural health guru that I'm going to be having on. She's been on before. You probably know her on Twitter, Sam the Quantum Revival. You ever see her stuff around?
I have not, but I am definitely interested in following.
Oh, she's all about natural healing and stuff. She's an ex-ICU nurse who turned herbalist. So it's cool to have somebody like that, in your corner. But Derek, let's get a brief history on yourself. Tell us about you and what you're about, man.
All right. So my journey kind of started, well, I mean, I'll kind of go back into the beginning. So I was raised in a very conservative household. I remember I was 12, around 12. And my brother had just come of age to vote, and he was excited to go vote. And I asked him who he was voting for, and my dad said, "Oh, he's voting Republican." And my brother echoed, "Yeah, because if you want to keep your money, you vote Republican." That's just kind of a glimpse into my childhood, right? And I remember probably one of the most cringiest portions in my life was in a high school speech class. We were obviously given an assignment to give a speech on something, and this was right around this was during 2003, right?
Okay.
Invasion of Iraq. And I remember giving a persuasive speech on why the invasion of Iraq was necessary, and why this was something that we needed to do. And it was not only cringe, but I remember very, very vividly. A classmate of mine had come up to me after the speech saying, I was on the fence, but you just convinced me, and I appreciate that very much. And just thinking about that now, I'm just that was not okay. So obviously being raised like that, I was very patriotic, American flag waving, and I wanted to be part of something that was bigger than myself and give back and serve my country. So I enlisted in the Navy in 2005, right out of high school, and got out after 6 years. And I remember during my first deployment is when I really started to kind of question things. My first deployment, we were in the North Arabian Gulf, guarding an Iraqi oil platform, from, anything, I guess. We were just sitting there steaming around, and our mission was to protect this oil platform. And I remember thinking, what the fuck are we doing here? Why? What does this have to do with, American freedom, right? I was still what I would consider like a constitutional conservative at this point, but that's what really got the wheels turning for me, is like, why are we here? What does this have to do with anything? I got out of the Navy in 2011, and by this time I was still pretty much a constitutional conservative, all about Ted Cruz. And, well, I don't know, was Ted Cruz a thing back then? I don't know. But I was still very much red, but I had a few libertarian leanings, like maybe this whole pot thing is dumb. The prohibition on marijuana. That seems like it's a little bit overbearing, but still, law and order. We can't let society deteriorate into anarchy, right? The evil anarchy, dystopian chaos. So we need law and order. As a big 10th Amendment guy, I remember being very frustrated, and I wanted to just kind of write. So I actually started writing. I wrote the first thing that I wrote was on gun rights. Being raised in Texas, it's in our culture, which surprisingly Texas is not as gun friendly as people think, from a political standpoint, but that's a whole nother topic of
Really,
conversation.
that's actually interesting. I'm surprised to hear that.
Well, there'll be a few more details here down the line.
I got you.
So, uh, I wrote a piece for Independent Journal Review on gun violence and statistics, and how it's being artificially inflated by including suicides. And this is probably 2015 ish, give or take. And I wrote a couple of pieces for them all on this, and then I was just firing them off on social media to whoever would read them. And I was contacted by a grassroots gun rights organization called Lone Star Gun Rights in 2016 that said, "Hey, this is good stuff. Do you want to come write for us?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So I joined Lone Star Gun Rights. Became their senior editor, and I hosted their podcast. And it was to document all of the lobbying efforts that we had in the state of Texas, because our main goal was get constitutional carry passed. This is, the first session that I was part of this was 2017. And, this was the big open carry Texas era, really. And, it was such a pain in the ass, trying to get, you were thinking Texas is known for guns,
Right.
and we have the most pro-gun bills you could imagine, and they're getting tabled and dying. And they would never do a record vote because they didn't want to go on the record with anything, so they would just make sure that it would always die in committee. And it was incredibly frustrating. It was great for me as a podcaster then. It was great for me for getting my content out there, and great for the organization as a whole. And I started getting more and more libertarian, and really it was kind of 2016 that did it for me as far as becoming a libertarian. Whenever I was just like, okay, Republican embraced this vile, disgusting human being known as Donald Trump. And I mean, I remember pushing like, yeah, I mean, here's his quote from his book talking about how he supports gun control, and here's this and here's that, and then Republicans just didn't care. And I was like, okay, I'm officially done with y'all. That was the first year that I voted libertarian. And yeah, it was for Gary Johnson. I think I still have my Johnson Weld shirt. I think I haven't donated it yet, but it is in the pile to go to donate.
Oh, nice.
So I started to transition there. And in 2017, I don't know if you remember back, but there was a school shooting in Santa Fe, Texas. And was that 2017 or 2018? It was around that time frame. There was a school shooting in Santa Fe, Texas, and we held a rally. Lone Star Gun Rights had teamed up with a bunch of other advocates, and we had held a gun rights rally called March for Our Kids, because it was in the wake of March for Our Lives, and this was March for Our Kids. And I was one of the people who had given a speech at this rally. And I remember one person had come up to me and said, "Hey, your speech was awesome. I was focused on natural rights, how gun ownership is a property right, doesn't matter what the Second Amendment says, blah blah blah." He was like, "You should write a book on liberty." I was like, "Yeah, that's not a bad idea." So that's what ultimately got me putting pen to paper for this book. But at the time, I was still kind of a libertarian, and as I was writing it, there was a point where I ended up transitioning to like a full-on minarchist, and then about halfway through, I ended up having to scrap about half of what I had already written to rewrite it, because I discovered Murray Rothbard and realized that anarcho-capitalism, voluntarism really is the only way that liberty can exist. And so that's kind of my transition throughout my life. I'm still in awe that Walter Block wrote the foreword to it. That's probably one of my greatest achievements, to be sure.
Yeah, man, that's pretty cool. And that's funny that you use Rothbard as a reference. I'm actually in the middle of, I just finished Anatomy of the State, and I'm in the middle of reading For a New Liberty right now. And Rothbard was a pretty based cat before base was ever a thing. I mean,
yeah,
he was really, back then, I mean, I believe For a New Liberty was written in the 70s, I want to say,
yeah. Yep.
and for somebody to be speaking like that against the state at that time was kind of a big deal, coming off the Nixon thing and the Vietnam War and all that crazy shit. And it's been quite an interesting read. I'm only, I think 4 chapters into it right now. It's the longest book ever. It's like 400 pages. It's a lot different from Anatomy of the State, because that one, I burned through that in an afternoon.
Right.
It's about 50 pages, and a lot of it's like big letters and short paragraph pages and stuff like that. But I mean, to hear somebody talk about, a stateless society and how it would work is very, for me, inspiring, and then, I read your book before I started reading those. And I must say, I'm very impressed by it. You did a very good job with it. Not too many people know the true meaning of liberty and what it stands for and what it's about. And so let's just, let's dig into your book now. What is liberty to you? Like, what does liberty mean to you?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the compliments. I very much appreciate that. It really is a labor of love. But, liberty was easy for me to define. I mean, we kind of chalk it up into like the single tweet, don't hurt each other and don't take their stuff. And that's true to an extent, but I wanted to make sure that it was a more formal definition, because as I wrote in chapter 1, if you ask people, what does liberty mean? You will get a bunch of different answers from people. And so there needed to be a standard. And it was incredibly easy for me to write that, the liberty is self-ownership, determining for yourself how you live your life, as long as you don't directly infringe on somebody else's right to do the same. And, that doesn't matter if it's, property infringement, physical harm, the direct infringement on somebody else's life to live, to have sole dominion over that. That's the only caveat. And that caveat's not brought, arbitrarily either, as I, go into later in the book. But, really it's just owning yourself, because if you don't own yourself, that means somebody else does. If you don't have the say over how you live your life, that means somebody else has the say over you. It means that there is a master-slave relationship that exists.
I mean, a lot of people don't realize, in the grand scheme of things, we are slaves. Mm-hmm. We go to work every day, and give our hard-earned, blood, sweat, and tears. Some of us cry at work. I don't know if everybody does, but, I'm sure some people do. I worked in the restaurant industry for 20 years. I saw a lot of tears. But,
right.
But you know what I mean? But then you work your ass off, and then they extort half your money from you. And so, in a sense, that's nationalized slavery. And there's no other way to pinpoint it. That's just what it is, and that's one thing, there's a reason we call the show BudsNReality, because I like to smoke weed and talk real shit, and that's about as real as it gets. And, but you had the perfect analogy in your book about liberty, when you were talking about people at their Memorial Day parades or their 4th of July parades, waving their flags and being proud of their country and being super patriotic, and then around the corner, there's people out there burning the American flag.
Mm-hmm.
And to some, they think that that should be illegal, or that is not right, or they don't have the right to do such a thing. But I mean, liberty in its purest form, both of those people are right. I mean, that person has the right to burn that flag, and the people have the right to be proud of that flag, and the people have a right to be happy about burning it, and the people have the right to be mad about burning it. But as long as nobody is, infringing, personally on that person, it's really none of their business how, somebody celebrates their country or doesn't.
Yeah, I forget who said it, and I'm kind of embarrassed. I don't remember if it was Ron Paul, Thomas Sowell, or even Rothbard, but they said that freedom ultimately means that people will act in a way that you don't like.
Yeah,
And that I kind of just took that idea and ran with it, because it's true. It is objectively true. There is no debate over it. And if anybody wants to debate what that means, I don't know what to tell you. This is an objective fact that liberty means that people will act in a way that you don't like.
that's right. So then moving on from that, what is liberty not?
So a lot of a lot of people, particularly on the left, though the right does do it, and I use the left-right paradigm as, in its modern accepted definitions, not its real, philosophical definitions. The left particularly likes to say that, liberty means that you have these guarantees in life, and you have these, you never will have to endure any struggle whatsoever. And to people that I see on Twitter, one of my favorite things to go to whenever I see, people should be given this, people should be given that, because they have the right, quote unquote, to make a living wage, to right to healthcare, blah blah blah. It's like, okay, so I'm going to accept your premise that rights are something that are guaranteed in life, and if you have to put forth any labor to achieve those, then it's exploitation. So therefore, I'm going to ask the question: is the lioness exploited by the gazelle because the gazelle makes her hunt it? Instead of just going to the lioness's feet and falling dead and saying, go ahead and eat me, is that exploitation? Because it is literally the same thing. That lioness is putting forth the labor for that hunt to obtain that kill. I mean, that's not a guarantee. How many hunts go unsuccessful in the world of, large felines, right? Or any apex predator for that matter.
I mean, hunting in general, there's nothing guaranteed. If you're a deer hunter or a rabbit and squirrel hunter, there's nothing guaranteed you're going to get anything that day you go out.
Yeah. So this idea that people have the quote unquote right to pay their mortgage, or not have to worry about where their next meal is coming from, it sounds good on paper, and if I'm being honest, I don't want to hear about people suffering. Nobody does.
No.
But that doesn't mean that you are entitled to this service or product or whatever it may be. Even if your life depends on it, you are not entitled to it. Now, if somebody wants to freely give it as a charitable or just be, out of the grace of their own heart, fine. They're effectively passing title of ownership to you. But nothing should be compelled for them to do that. We as humans should say, hey, identify somebody suffering and say, hey, we should help this person. They've had a whole slew of bad luck. They're down. They're not going to be able to make whatever payments. Let's gather together and help them. We should encourage that, but it shouldn't be done at the barrel of a gun. And just because people think that something is a right doesn't mean that it's now magically no longer, the laws of scarcity and supply and demand no longer apply. It still does, very much so.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree with you. Like, if somebody wants to act on a voluntary accord to help somebody out, I think that's a much better situation than, the force of a gun of saying, hey, you owe this person this, even though you put in your hard-earned labor, but you have to give it away just because somebody told you to. And that's where I have a problem with like socialism and stuff like that, because that's not liberty. That is not a choice. That is somebody forcing you by rule of a gun, like you said, to extort your hard-earned labors that yourself, you're the one who gave that labor. So, I mean, I'm with you on that. Now let's move on to the next thing, which is private property. And a lot of people don't understand. Well, I shouldn't say they don't understand private property, but they don't understand it completely. Like most people think their private property is their car, their house, or, their iPhone, or, tangible objects, and they're not wrong. But the most important part of private property is yourself, your body. That is your own private property. That is you. Your labor is your private property, that you go to work every day, and that gets, misconstrued big time. And that, what do you think about private property?
Well, I mean, obviously your tangible property is your private property. My bookshelf in the background, I own all of those books. They are mine. This house that I'm in, this computer that I'm on, this microphone I'm speaking into, yes, they are all my private property. But ultimately, my body is my private property because it is the thing that I use to put labor into things. And the labor that we all put in and to generate the fruits of our labor, property is nothing more than the fruits of your labor. Well, the ultimate fruit of your labor is yourself. If you don't have sole ownership of that, as I kind of said earlier, then that means somebody else has ownership of it. This goes to anything, whether you, and this is something that it kind of worries me a lot when I see in the libertarian groups on Twitter, is whenever they go and they attack trans people. Trans people are really just expressing their own private property rights over their own selves. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that you have to address them by whatever pronouns they dictate that you do. You shouldn't be forced to, but it's a courtesy. And as ownership of their own body, they also have the right to dictate how they would prefer to be addressed. And, I one of the big problems I see on in a lot of libertarian and especially in conservative circles on social media is that we dehumanize people. Actually, that's no matter what spectrum you're on, but we dehumanize trans people by intentionally saying, going out of our way to say, oh, that's actually a man. That's he is doing this and this and this, and it's like, just stop. What we should be focusing on is their philosophies, their beliefs, right? So Dylan Mulvaney, I can't stand her. I really can't. I find her annoying. But I'm going to continue to call her a her because I feel like she has the right to say, I want to live my life as a woman. And it's courteous. I think her politics are whack. And I'm going to criticize her politics, but I'm not going to criticize her for being trans. I don't think that it's productive. I think that if anything, all it does is solidify this collectivist identity within the LGBTQ community, where people, if you attack one of them, you effectively attack them all. I want people to be receptive to the messages of liberty. And we can't do that by attacking somebody because of the fact that they're trans or whatever. I know I kind of went off on a tangent here, but to me, I think it's the ultimate property right for a trans person to say, yes, I'm trans. I identify this way. I would prefer that you call me this, this, and this. And, to me, that's the ultimate expression of property ownership for their own body. I know that kind of went off
I totally get it. And I mean, that's kind of happening right now. My biggest thing with the trans movement is that they're like literally the most protected group of people in the United States right now. You can't really, you could lose your job for saying something against what they're doing right now, which is kind of absurd to me. But, do what you do. If you're an adult, do whatever you want, be whatever you want. I'm more like, just leave the kids out of it. That's my take, leave the kids alone. Do whatever you want, man. You're an adult. You can be whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. You can mutilate yourself if you want. That is totally fine. I don't care personally. Just leave the kids out of it. That's kind of my whole thing about it. I kind of think it's hilarious to watch people lose their mind over piss water beer, because like it's so stupid. Like Bud Light's an awful product. It's what high school kids drink before they figure out what beer is. So
I don't remember the last time I had a Bud Light.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? So, but I will say the memes are solid gold. I'll take the memes all day. They're quite hilarious, but I think it's silly that people are that upset over, a piss water beer, because that's what it is to me anyways. I mean, I wouldn't drink that shit. If somebody even like offered it to me for free, I'm straight, man. Keep it. You know what I mean? Like, but that's but the property rights thing is goes along with like your natural rights as like a right to life and a right as a human. You have the right to treat your body as you choose. So I'm with you on that standpoint. Now, taxation, my friend, which every libertarian and every anarchist is like, raw, you know what I mean? Because we hate taxes. But you had an interesting chapter in your book about taxation, and I believe you said taxation is not theft, it's extortion. Dig into that.
So, I mean, extortion is a form of theft,
Yes.
and it's just to be clear, but I think extortion is the better word to use because, I mean, if you think about organized crime, how they would extort money from businesses for quote unquote protection. Oh, wait, that sounds exactly like what the state does. But anyway, that's completely different. But what they would do is they wouldn't go into those stores and aim a gun at them and say, give me the money. They would walk in and say, hey, I need my cut. And if they didn't produce their cut at that point, they would invoke violence against them. And that better fits the definition of extortion, where the threat of violence is not as overt, it's implied. Whenever we file our theft paperwork every year, we don't do it literally at the barrel of a gun from an IRS agent as he walks into our house and says, file your taxes. But if you don't, that is what will happen. So, I think that, you can play on this as much as you want. Technically, taxation is slavery because you are claiming ownership over the fruits of your labor. It is theft in the fact that, you are stealing from somebody what is rightfully theirs. And it's extortion because you're using an inherent threat of violence as a means of taking it, but it's not a direct and overt threat of violence as, say a robbery would be. So, I mean, I kind of wish I would have taken it a step further and included the slavery aspect of it in that chapter. But, I mean, taxation is all three. It is theft, it is extortion, and it is slavery.
Absolutely. Because number one, nobody ever consented to it whatsoever. They just take it. And especially like if you work a job where they automatically take your taxes out, I mean, they just take whatever they feel like taking. You don't really get a say in there. So how is that not theft? And how is it not slavery if, you're putting your hard-earned labor into it and they just take it from you anyways? And the extortion fact, some people think that's a little steep, but let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, try not paying your taxes and see who shows up at your door with long rifles and suits. Because that's how that goes for real, man. It's a real thing.
They will Waco you for their tax money,
which we just had the anniversary of that Waco massacre. And that's I had a debate with a friend about that recently, to where, they believed some things that came out in the media, but, about how that happened and how it went down. But really, the whole story about Waco in a nutshell is wishy-washy right off the rip. They could have, there was multiple opportunities. Now I'll go off on a tangent right now. There was multiple opportunities to arrest David Koresh before that even happened. Like it's not like he never left that compound. And
he went for a run.
They had surveillance on him for a long time. So it's like they could have arrested him and got warrants long before that ever happened. That was unnecessary, that had to happen the way it did. And 82 people were alive.
and he had a relationship with the sheriff at the time. So, I mean, there were plenty of opportunities. If and the thing is, I don't recall ever hearing about any weapons, any quote unquote illegal weapons being found after the fire. And that was the whole purpose of their warrant, is that they said that they had, full auto weapons and explosives. I don't recall them ever saying, yeah, we found those. Here's the evidence that proved our warrant was legit. They just kind of buried it.
The whole thing, the whole story is just, when it's wishy-washy like that, how are you not supposed to question that, really, in theory? And the fact that they could have got him, before all this is like, what the hell, man? Is this like what they wanted to do? Is this what they set out to do? And I'm a firm believer that, don't think for 2 seconds that the state won't sacrifice children in order to, you push their agenda, because they will. They do it all the time. Look at what they do in other countries. I mean, it's really gross, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, in the 90s, Madeleine Albright was ridiculed because she said that the sanctions that the U.S. had put on Iraq at the time was, quote, worth it, when asked about the 500,000 children that had died as a direct result of those sanctions. They have no qualms with murdering children. Waco was not the first instance. It will not be the last. And it also wasn't the first or the last instance that they have done it on American soil to Americans. So if that's not evil, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I mean, evil's evil. And that's where we're at right now. A lot of people, most in the society, think this is a red versus blue problem. We are at a good versus evil situation right now. It has nothing to do with government. It's the state versus us. We're the good ones. They're the evil ones. It's hard to really, make it make sense to some people without, looking like that dude in the meme who's all crazy on the whiteboard. You know what I'm saying? That's what I feel like, a lot of us, or a lot of people think about, us in this side of things. They look at us like that, which is unfortunate. But I mean, I think people are waking up little by little. We need to be waking them up millions by millions right now, because, I feel like we are running out of time. Something big is about to happen here. I'm not going to say this, that, or the other, but something big is coming. And I feel like we all need to be prepared for it. But the next subject I want to bring up from your book is something that you called the biggest heist in human history.
Oh, the creature from Jekyll Island is what you're
Oh
referring
my
to.
goodness. That couldn't have been portrayed in a better way. The Federal Reserve, man, the greatest heist in human history. I'm with that. I really like the way you worded that. That was very cool. Dig into that for a little bit.
That was the single chapter that took the longest for me to research and write. I read so much. I actually, you talked about In the Fed. That was the first book that I read to study for writing this chapter. And oddly enough, I don't understand how this happened. I still haven't read The Creature from Jekyll Island.
Oh, wow.
It's on my reading list. But I still haven't read it. It's odd, but I will correct that as soon as possible, just for everybody out there. But I wanted to make sure that the chapter was tailored, from a historical standpoint, as everything that can be historically verified from even the most basic sources, right? It was an intro, if you will, to the Federal Reserve. I think it goes a lot deeper than what I portray, but this was just kind of a taste test for anybody who's not familiar with how the Federal Reserve operates and its history. And what the things that did really shock me in my research was probably the one thing that stands out to me the most was that Aldrich's bill, the original Federal Reserve Act, was actually not what got passed. It was a Democratic version by a congressman or senator named Glass. And there were some differences. Overall, the bill was the same, but the difference is, as one congressman that I cite in that chapter notes, is where the power lies. And this congressman said that the difference in power structure between the Aldrich plan and the Glass plan ultimately was that the Aldrich plan gave too much power to the banks and the businesses, and the Glass bill, or no, I'm sorry, I think I have that backwards. The Aldrich plan gave too much power to, you know what? I'm going to be caught lying on my own writing. I can't remember. Anyway, one plan gave too much power to the banks, and the other plan gave too much power to the government. I think it was the Glass bill that he said gave too much power to the government. But what's, as we all know as libertarians, is that the Federal Reserve is not a federal entity in any way. It's essentially a conglomerate of a bunch of private banks, but the structure is so insanely backwards that it's hard to know exactly where the true power lies outside of the committee that meets by law 4 times per year to set the interest rates. And that's all that anybody really cares about these days, especially when, with our current economic situation. Everybody's wanting to know, what is the Fed going to do with interest rates, this quarter? The amount of power that they have is insane. And if you read how that committee is made up, you realize that these are just random ass people that are unelected, unaccountable, nameless, and faceless, that have the power to drive the entire national currency in one direction. And that's insane to me. They're you can't file like articles of impeachment against them. You can't remove them from office. The Senate confirms a lot of these officers, and that's it. The member banks, they have a president that they elect amongst themselves. So I don't know, have you ever received from your bank, hey, here's who's running for our district president? Who would you like? Here's where they stand on certain issues. Have you ever received anything like that?
When I get things in the mail from the bank, I really just kind of shred it, because I know what's there and not's there. You know what I'm saying? And that's probably foolish on my end. But like, I really don't get into that, just because I'm aware of how money works and how the dollar works. And, I want to point something out that you wrote in your book that's something I learned was, I knew that the bank or the Fed, valued and devalued the dollar the way it did, and how it never actually, gets back to the dollar. But you pointed out there's a time in history where the dollar was actually worth more than $1, and it got to like $1.20. And then they drove it down on purpose because they couldn't have the dollar being worth too much either.
Yeah.
And that boggled my mind. I was like, wait a minute, that sounds insane. But it does check out. And I will say this, you have a lot of stats in this book, a lot, and they all check out. I've been off work from surgery, so I have nothing better to do besides read shit and look shit up. So I did. I checked your work, and a couple things are different just because from the time your book was published, things have moved around, but it all makes sense. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, first off, where do you come up with this shit? Like, where did you, you've done a lot of homework to figure all this stuff out and write this stuff down and put it on paper, man.
It took a lot of Google magic, man. Well, actually DuckDuckGo magic. My Google's broken. I don't use Google, but yeah, it took a lot of hammering in. I had to actually, I had to evaluate a lot of different data points. You have your CPI data, but then you'd also have like your inflation calculators, and some of them would veer off just a little bit. And so I had to compile like all of this together in a spreadsheet to make sure that, and find the median to try and make the data as solid as humanly possible. I made sure that I cited everything that I did, that I did pull from as far as data is concerned, or any stories that I pulled from the news or whatever. But there was a lot, particularly in this chapter, of getting data from multiple sources and combining it all together to see what the story tells. this is not something that a lot of people do. They will cherry pick their favorite data point, even if it's, something that we agree with. They'll cherry pick their favorite data point, present it on Twitter or Facebook, and say, "Hey, look, this is the reality." And it's like, okay, that's partially the reality. There's a lot more that goes into it that tells a much deeper story. Notice that, and this is probably one thing that one of the things that I'm most proud of in my book, is that I was able to find the essentially the value of a dollar before the Federal Reserve. Most graphs actually all graphs that you see today talk about since 1913. Here's what the dollar did. I asked the question, what did the dollar do before? And I was just as blown away as you were as to how the dollar was, from 1791 until 1913, and how, from a relative standpoint, how it was. Its biggest dip was, I think, like 56% of its value, and that was during the War of 1812, whenever this is a brand new country and it's at war with the global superpower, and the currency is brand new. So yeah, people are going to lose confidence in the value of it, but then they end up winning that war, so confidence comes back up. And you can see that since then, it was relatively stable. It had some ups and downs, but it was still right around the value of a dollar for the most part until the Civil War, which makes sense from the value of a currency.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's seeing that really kind of hammers home the destruction that the Federal Reserve itself has done. Because, yeah, you can look at it from the 1913 standpoint and be like, man, that's really bad. But whenever you see everything before, it makes it exponentially worse, because you realize that the dollar actually was pretty stable for the most part in the 120 something years prior to that.
Right. And the fact of the matter is that the dollar, from 1913, I believe right now, the dollar is worth 3% of the value that it was originally in 1913 when the Fed took over. And there's only one reason for it, and that is the endless printing of money. And, people will say, everything's so expensive now. And they point at, look at the 50s and you could buy a house for $7,500 or something like that. And it's not the fact that things got more expensive. It's the value of the dollar has gone to shit so much that it drove up in inflation, which is the worst tax of all. We can be mad at the federal government for taking our money or the state government for taking our money, but really the inflation is a direct attack on the poor and the middle class. And I wish more would wake up to that, really. And it's all the Federal Reserve's fault. And it's also the government's fault for not keeping them in check. Because mind you, the Fed's never been audited ever in the history of the Federal Reserve. Hasn't been audited by anyone, but yet Bitcoin gets edited, multiple times per hour daily,
what's really bad about inflation. I mean, it is a tax, but it's the most sinister thing ever, really, because I'm not sure how I can really put this. At least when a thief robs you, at a minimum, they're gaining a benefit out of it, and you can kind of understand that aspect of it. With inflation, nobody benefits.
No.
The federal government doesn't benefit. State governments don't benefit. The Federal Reserve doesn't benefit. It's just destructive. And that's a whole new level of evil that I can't even really define, because, like I said, and this is just because I can't really think of a phrase to better put it. At least whenever an evil person robs you, they're doing it for their own gain. If that makes sense. Does that make sense?
And they're only going to get so much. They're only getting whatever you have in your pocket.
Right. They're not robbing the generations that haven't even been born yet, out of their wealth.
That's what, I saw an interesting stat to where, like, any child born right now is already inherited like over $150,000 in taxes. Right off the rip, from the time they're born, they're in debt to the system of over 150 grand. And they haven't even, taken a shit yet, per se.
Well, if you read the fine print of the social contract, you'll see exactly how this is valid.
Well, as Spooner said, I didn't sign shit. So
Yeah. Direct quote. That is a direct quote from Spooner, and I completely agree.
now let's move to foreign affairs, because you do talk about that in your book, the foreign interventions, and how, a lot of this evil that comes from our government comes from their foreign affairs meddling in other people's business. And now other countries are furious with us right now. There's many, and now they're joining forces, leaving our monetary system because of it. Let's go there for a minute, because you were in the military. I mean, you saw it.
I saw just a little bit of it. A lot of what really drove this collection of grievances from a foreign policy standpoint definitely came after the fact. When I left the military, I was still kind of a red-blooded conservative type. But you know, anybody who studies history, a lot of them get the propagandized version where America is always the good guys. You have to really go digging to find out that America's not the good guys. There are no good guys. This is just I don't even know I don't even know if there's a word for it.
Evil.
I don't even think that does it justice. I really don't. At a minimum, and this is just what I was able to find, at a minimum, the United States has been meddling in foreign affairs covertly and overtly since 1953. That's just based off of what I could find from declassified documents. And there is a great book that I read. I really had intended to just read portions of this book, but I ended up reading it cover to cover. It's called All the Shah's Men, and it talks about the 1953 coup in Iran. And the history behind that is very, very well written. I still have a copy on my bookshelf, and I'm probably going to end up reading it again. It really is a fantastic book that kind of goes into how the 1953 coup started everything for American foreign policy, and in a weird kind of way is responsible for 9/11. And not directly, of course, but our constant meddling in that region for decades, better part of a century now, it fuels that hatred to where, yeah, somebody like Osama bin Laden would definitely come up with a plan to attack America, because America doesn't give a shit about him or the destruction that they do to people that he cares about. And that's not to justify what happened, but it is to explain it. America's not the good guys. We never are. And if you ever read a history book where America where the victors are always the good guys, there's something wrong with your history.
Well, I mean, what's good about war? What comes out of that? Nothing. The military industrial complex gets paid. The powers that be get paid, but never mind the countless lives that are lost, or the monetary system that's destroyed to the American people or to the other countries that are being attacked. I don't want to sound anti-American here. I am not anti-America. I am very pro-America, but I am anti-government. I am pro my neighbors. I am pro, the people down the street. I'm pro the next county over. I'm pro those people. I'm pro my fellow humans. I am not pro war, or pro war hawks or governments that just go meddling in business to make their friends rich. That's not what I'm pro, and that's, a lot of people, have called me anti-American lately. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. I'm not going to accept that, because just because I'm against our government doesn't mean I'm against America. I love this place. This is still, America. I was born here, I was raised here, but like, I'm going to call out the shit when I see it. This is kind of why I do this, and I want to open people's eyes that, we're fighting over people right now, whether it be right side or left side, they're fighting each other over pedophiles and murderers. I mean, at the end of the day, that they don't care about nothing but personal gain. They don't care about war. Fuck you and your family is what they think. That's.
Yeah. I kind of have a little bit of a different take. I don't care if somebody thinks I'm un-American. I really don't care about labels. I think the whole notion of America is just kind of like this marketing tactic to kind of superimpose itself over the idea of liberty. If somebody wants to say that I'm anti-American because of my stances, fuck it, so be it. And then
they are within their rights to feel that way, it's
right, but I don't necessarily disagree with them. To me though, America is just a euphemism that has been bastardized, a bastardized euphemism for liberty. I prefer the real thing. I don't want some watered down marketing gimmicked version of liberty. I don't want a version of liberty that only fits for a certain class or a certain group of people. I want a version of liberty that is universal to every single individual on the planet. And so, if people want to call me anti-American, sure, fuck it. I don't disagree. If that's what being anti-American is, I don't disagree.
Well, I mean, people are going to say what they say, and you're not going to change their minds. But now let's move forward here because, we've totally bashed the state now, and rightfully so. So let's explain how a stateless society could work and what would happen to social programs and my roads. What about my roads?
Well, the roads
let's talk about that, because a lot of people think that this wouldn't work without government. And I firmly disagree with that.
Private industry and entrepreneurialism and charity and the thing is, like, capitalism, and I define capitalism, and I know that there's some disagreement here, and that's
pure
fine.
Capitalism we're talking.
I define pure capitalism as nothing more than the free and voluntary exchange of private property. That's it.
Exactly.
Now, I know a lot of people might disagree with that, but that's what I mean when I say capitalism. It is very voluntarist to me. To me, there's no difference between a voluntarist society and an ANCAP society. There are some voluntarists who might disagree on some of the nuances, but just so we're clear, this is how I define capitalism. Capitalism has come up with a solution to literally everything in the world because it's innovative. People don't want to be stuck in the 15th century reading by candlelight and dipping their ink, their feather quills into this iron gall ink that is just the new latest technology, right? People want to innovate. They want to make things better. That's what capitalism has been all about, because there's an aspect of greed about it. That's not a bad thing. Whenever people have a financial incentive to innovate, that's a wonderful thing for everybody. Even if you had the stereotypical capitalist who just wants to take as much money as he can and smoke his cigars and wear his top hat, chances are he is still beholden to how the market reacts, and his profits will dwindle if he acts in a way that the market doesn't like. So right. let's talk. I want to actually see if I can pull this up here. Yeah. Okay. So looking at some of the data that I compiled, we had $10.2 trillion in adjusted gross income in 2016. And the tax revenue was $6 trillion, right? But if we ended up not taxing people and having people choose where their money goes, to include charities, to include things like infrastructure, and keep the actual percentages the same, not only does the individual still come out nearly doubling his net income, but everything is still fully funded. You know, we I don't want to dig too much into the numbers, but you know, the welfare state, it's not there. There's no, how do I want to put this? There's no financial incentive to get people on back onto their feet, and so there is this leech like mentality from some, or even a lot of, not everybody, but a lot of people that utilize the system. And it's no longer the taboo thing that it used to be in, say, like the 50s and 60s. It's just this thing. Yep, I qualify. Let me get my government check. And because it's funded off of extortion, people are less charitable, because why would I continue to give to charity except for, say, tax breaks, when, you know, everybody's needs are getting fed from the government anyway?
Which they
If you
did take
eliminate,
away, by the way. They took away tax breaks for charities, believe it or not, because I donated to charity 2 years ago, and my accountant was like, "This is the last year you can do that," and I was like, "Excuse me?"
wow.
Yeah, that happened. Yeah, that was yeah. So it was 2 years ago, but last year when I filed or whatever, and my accountant said, "Hey, that you can't do this anymore. This is the last year you can do this," and I was like, "Holy
Well,
shit!"
that's crazy.
Now let me throw something out there for people right now. Um, you know, people seem to believe, especially, and I don't want to point fingers, but a lot of people on the left side think that people are not generous and that they won't give. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. And I'm actually living proof of how generous people are. With the surgery I just had, this actually started back in November. And I had to ask for voluntarism. I had to start a GoFundMe page for myself because, I was in the hospital for 8 days with no insurance. And I, which shame on me, but that's the way it worked out. And now that being said, you know, people are getting taxed more than they ever have right now. But people were very, very generous towards me and really helped me and my family out during that time. People I didn't even know would drop a couple $100 here and there. Okay. So the fact that people are not generous is completely off base. I don't believe that for 1 second. People donate to charities all the time. Now imagine if people got 100% of their money, how generous they would be.
Yeah. And I think I did point it out in the data that I compiled, is that despite having more money taxed from them, more people have donated to charity over the last 50 years than before, which is incredible. Granted, their motives might be off because of the system that the state has created. But if you eliminate that, people will go back to understanding that charity is a good thing. And charity is still the best means of helping people that exists. The state can't do it. The state has no vested interest in helping people get back on their feet, unlike a private charity who has a vested interest in getting people back on their feet, because otherwise they're just getting sucked dry. They're not going to tolerate that sort of thing. Whereas, right, whenever you're this empire that gets all of its revenue off of extortion, you have no incentive to do that, because it's just, at the end of the day, it's just money, right?
Right.
And if you really think about it, the bulk of what our tax dollars go to are not charitable organizations, or they're not for roads. They're for pet projects. They are for other political capital that people use to get one bill or another passed. These aren't. It's not as, it doesn't carry as much weight whenever in reality. Whereas if you abolished all of the state's extortion and everybody kept everything that they had, you would have total control over it. And that's a beautiful thing.
It's a wonderful thing. And it's not like the things wouldn't get paid for. I mean, I explain it like this. Let me catch my tongue real quick there. Sorry about that. But, I live in Michigan, and we get all kinds of money extorted from us, and you should see my roads here. Oh my God, they're a disaster. You know, so I would much prefer, and I think that a lot of people would be on board with paying for my roads directly. Like, this is your share of what you owe for the roads, and if you want to donate to this charity, this is where this charity sends this money. It could go to healthcare or housing, or, people who really need it, because right now the system is they extort your money. They tell you it's going to these places when really they're just lining their pockets and their friends' pockets are, spending it on their foreign policy somewhere. It's actually a really shitty system, no matter which way you look at it, and people who are worried about, total and complete capitalism, if we had true capitalism, and I know most everybody would agree with this, if capitalism was in its truest form, those banks would have never been bailed out. Those corporations would have failed, because that's part of, that's what true capitalism is. Things fail. That's just what it is. Instead, we have a crony capitalism that extorts our money to pay for these people to bail out their friends. That is not capitalism, not even a little bit.
Yeah, no, that people seem to think that capitalism is like Enron, when in fact capitalism is like Amazon.
Right.
They're completely different worlds. I forgot, I lost my train of thought. I was going somewhere and yeah. But like I said, capitalism is nothing more than the free and voluntary exchange of private property. It doesn't require extortion as people think. There is no extortion whenever everything's voluntary. You can't extort somebody voluntarily.
No, you can't. And there's no cronyism in it either. I mean, it's crazy. You take all the bureaucrats and all of it out. I mean, what people believe capitalism is really a crony situation. But that the government will tell you, well, this is what capitalism does, so we need socialism. No, hold on a second. More government never works, and we're looking at it right now, right in the face.
Yeah, and a lot of people seem to think that the healthcare industry is indicative of capitalism, and with how expensive it is. Like, you don't realize that the reason that healthcare is so expensive is the same reason that college tuition is so expensive. It's because the government controls the costs associated with it. Whether it's from FDA compliance or anything like that, those costs ultimately get rolled into everything. And then whenever you tack on the insurance mandates, you're just compounding the issues. If you had a free society in a purely capitalistic form, insurance might not even exist because it won't be necessary, and people could actually pay for even extensive surgeries on a realistic payment plan that's not going to break them, and it's going to cost a fraction of the amount that we would see today even.
That's right. And that's, this is why I'm a big advocate for an anarchist society. Me being a realist understands that that's very highly unlikely, unless we see a complete and collapse fall of, society. We might get that. But this is why I push for libertarians, because this is the closest thing we will get to anarchism, because really you can't have libertarians without anarchy. The whole philosophy in itself is based off the anarchist ideologies. Don't hurt people, don't take their stuff. Private property is everything, and that means yourself as well. Like, people, please understand that your private property is your own self, and you own yourself, and you own your life. These people have no right to tell you how you can live or not live, and steal money from you every day and hurt your family every day the way they do through extortion and or policy. I mean, at the end of the day, we got to give. So let's go from there to decentralized money and why that is so important to a stateless society.
Well, the Federal Reserve is the greatest example of why centralized monetary policy is awful. There are other central banks that you could use as a great example as well. The Federal Reserve is just the one that we're the most familiar with. But you said it. Bitcoin gets audited multiple times an hour and is completely independently audited. There is no more Bitcoin that can be fabricated than was already set out from the time it came a thing. And that's true with a lot of other cryptos. You see it right now, just going into the crypto. If you look at any graph or any chart, you will see this crypto compared to the US dollar, this crypto compared to Ethereum, this crypto compared to Bitcoin, and on down the line. And that's really what competition is all about. That's if you got rid of US monetary policy and everything was paid for by crypto, gold, silver, metals, or anything that somebody else said had value, you would actually have a far more stable monetary system than you can ever imagine. It levels the playing field exponentially because one, you're not seeing this permanent inflationary price. And there's a difference between inflation and devaluation. Devaluation is what we're actually seeing, not inflation. There's a temporary rise and fall because of an unexpected setback in supply or demand, something like that. The price artificially inflates, or the price inflates for a little bit and then comes back down. That's inflation. Devaluation is permanent. That's what the centralized banks do. That's what we see each and every day. We go to the grocery store and we realize that the $120 that we planned on spending there is buying less and less and less. That is crippling for any economy. And the reason that it does that is because the supply is artificially inflated just on a whim. It's backed by nothing. It is controlled by a nameless, faceless, unelected, unaccountable, bureaucratic entity that the total is, I would say, is the single most powerful entity in the world, even more powerful than the United States federal government itself. And it gets to dictate the value of your money. But for some reason, they do not have the power to raise the to counter what the market says and reinstitute the value that is lost. That's the one power they don't have, and that's because they're not God. And if we had control of our money, if we had competition in a monetary system, the way that we see in crypto, if we see something that happens like what happened with Luna a few months ago, where people lost complete confidence in it, there's another currency to go to that people do have confidence in.
Right.
If you were in Luna and you were like, okay, something's not right here, I'm feeling a little off, put it all in Bitcoin, it tanks. Guess what? Your assets are safe. What's going to happen to your bank account if it's stuck in US dollar?
You lose everything.
Exactly.
It's gone.
Yeah. And you can't print more crypto. I mean, some of the meme coins, I guess you could. But those are kind of a pump and dump thing that people should steer clear of, in my opinion. But that's, whatever they want to do.
I'm with Shane Hazel on this one. If it's not Bitcoin, it's a shit coin. I'm not too big in the cryptos or whatever and whatnot. I learned a hard lesson from the Dogecoin. That didn't come out so well for me. So I kind of believe in that. Ethereum tag team with the government. So I'm like, I don't know about that. But, I'm also on board with gold, silver, especially silver. I think silver is still something pretty economical to get yourself into. Gold's up pretty high right now, but I think it's not a bad investment just because when the brick system does take off and it's backed by gold, I think the value of gold is going to actually skyrocket. So that wouldn't be such a bad investment. But I didn't hear that nowhere. That's just my own little personal thing.
Not financial advice.
Yeah. I'm not a financial advisor by all means. That's not what I'm a painter and a podcaster. That's what I do. I just give out, maybe a few ideas, but, in closing, why is liberty the ultimate answer to our problem right now?
Well, because if you don't have it, then you're a slave. And I mean, I really can't put it any more simply than that. If you don't have liberty, then slave. I mean, slavery is evil. To claim ownership over another person is despicable. it doesn't matter how you treat them. There's a lot of, huh?
It's vile. It's a
Yeah.
vile. It,
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of Southerners that I've spoken with, and I was born and raised in Texas. I've heard it all. I've heard of people say things like, "Oh yeah, oh, uh, slaves weren't treated badly at all." It doesn't matter. People do not own other people.
period.
Period. I don't care if you treat them as if you treat them like your family, right? You treat them with the utmost respect. If you claim ownership of them, you're an evil person. You're even more evil if you treat them like less than you, but that's beside the point. Slavery still exists across the world. It's just called statism.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter the form of government. It doesn't matter how limited the government is. It doesn't matter what the Constitution says or doesn't say. You're still a slave if somebody else has more of a say over your life, your body, and the fruits of it than you do. And the fact that people support this, it's sad because they've been so indoctrinated to believe that without this system of slavery in place, that chaos will ensue and the warlords will take over and might makes right. And my response is, that's what we have already.
It's like, hello.
The warlords in Washington
anyone?
have taken over. Might makes right. Look at the U.S. government. Tell me that's not the very definition of might right. What people fear about anarchy is actually the worst aspects of statism that are on display right now.
Yep.
And if you want an example of anarchy working, just go to your neighbor, talk to your neighbor. Hey, can I borrow a cup of sugar? That's anarchy working. The little girl who sets up a lemonade stand on the corner.
That's anarchy.
Hell, Girl Scout cookies, right? I mean,
That's
that
black
is
market
anarchy,
shit, man.
Yeah.
And make black markets great,
Yeah, I mean, black markets are really nothing more than the actual representation of the real market. But
it's the only true free market out there, period. Like the black market is the only true form of a free market.
Yep.
I mean, there's some illegal activities that happens through there, and I'm not condoning those by all means, but I mean, go to a farmer's market. I said it in my last show. Support your local black market by going to the farmer's market or buying meat from a farmer directly, or or trading some corn for some tomatoes from your neighbor. I mean, all that's anarchy, baby.
That is what anarchy looks like. The thing is, like, I'm not naive enough to think that this sort of thing could happen overnight. And if it did, it would not really be an ideal situation, because people are going to be clinging on to the ideologies that they've been conditioned to believe, right? But just look around. You see the worst aspects of anarchy exist in the state society that we have. And if that's your worst fear of anarchy, that's no reason to oppose it. It already exists.
Right. I mean,
the only thing is you actually get to own yourself. And it will take a cultural change. I do encourage discussion, civil discussion amongst people of all philosophies to try and persuade them to accept this ideology and embrace it as something that's better. But I also, I'm just another guy. If somebody happens to bring to me a philosophy that makes more sense than this, I'm open-minded to it. If they can explain to me a version of statism that is actually objectively better, I'm open to it. Tell me about it. But in the meantime, I'm going to convince you that statism is evil and that you need to divest yourself a change of servitude that you have to it. And, it's funny and it's sad at the same time whenever people are like, whenever I'm in a gun debate and they're like, so you think that, guns should be less regulated? What about people in driving and this? And I'm like, well, I don't believe in driver's licenses. I don't believe in, oh, you don't want people to take driver's tests? I didn't say that. Good ideas don't require force.
mm-hmm.
if I'm a complete novice and I'm going to get behind the wheel of a 2-ton vehicle, I'm not going to do it and just, well, I know what I'm doing. Let's just go. I'm going to ask people, hey, what do I need to know about operating this thing safely? I don't want to wreck into somebody. I want to get my pilot's license soon. Somebody has asked me, so you don't think the FAA should exist? No, I don't think pilot's licenses should exist. I don't think the FAA should exist. But you know what? If it didn't, I'm not going to just hop into a plane and be like, all right, let's go.
Right.
I'm be like, hey, teach me everything I need to know to safely operate this.
Well, yeah, because you're not going to want to kill yourself up there. You know what I mean?
I don't want to kill myself. I don't want to kill anybody else. I don't want to hurt anybody else. I don't want to damage anything. I want to do it safely, and it doesn't require the FAA saying you need 40 hours in the cockpit before you can do this yourself and take passengers. What if I'm ready in 20? What if I'm ready in 10? It depends. Every person is different, but they're like, here's the line. And if you want to fly instrument, there's another 40 hours that you have to do with instrument. Okay. Well, anyway, that off on a tangent again.
Well,
Sorry.
And the whole thing about, the anarchy in general is misconstrued, and a lot of people who do understand what anarchy is, a lot of people, those people who kind of understand what it is anyways, not the people who think that we're burning down buildings and shit like the media says. But I mean, the people who understand what anarchy actually is kind of look at us like we're a bunch of selfish pricks, that we only care about ourselves, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Like, I'm more worried about my neighbors and how they're doing than what I am, what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I've never heard, anarchists be like me, 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 me. Of course, we're individualists. Of course, individual freedom is kind of the whole thing of, with anarchy. But the fact of the matter is that, we care about other people, more than we care about ourselves, honestly. At least that's the way I look at it.
Here's the thing. Like, if the state were to disappear overnight, there would be very little that I would actually change about my life. I care more about what, the freedom of other people to choose, actually have an actual choice. Maybe I'd buy a couple of firearms that have the fun switch on them, without an NFA tax stamp. Or, maybe I would, buy somebody's moonshine or something like that. But I really wouldn't be like, oh man, I'm going to go shoot heroin right now.
I know. And I'm going to go build me a fully automatic 50 cal, which actually sounds pretty awesome. But you know what I mean? The market wouldn't allow me to do that. I couldn't afford to do that. You know what I mean? That's the free market too, like supply and demand, but it's been a cool conversation, man. I'm glad we had it. Before we take off, I got to give a shout out to my new sponsor, the Infinite Zeal Syndicate. He's not looking for a huge shout out, but I will say this. My man, Joel, is just looking for like-minded people to meme our way through life, laugh through the bullshit, and just have a good time and find, liberty minds and come together and start planning, and then that's what he's about. And that's who's sponsoring the show now. And I got to give him a shout out. Thank you very much, Joel. Get at him on Twitter @_Infinite Zeal, Infinite Zeal Syndicate. He's a great dude. He's actually the nicest guy you'll ever find on social media ever. And then also get the book, man, The Liberty Solution by Derek Wills. I absolutely enjoyed it. It's definitely eye-opening. It's definitely, it'll open your mind a little bit. You have to read it with an open mind. I'm not going to say it's not going to ruffle feathers. I found a couple of spots where I let my feels get in the way of actual liberty. And that's what we do as humans. But, you came from a good place. I totally understand it, and you actually explain everything too. Like, I feel like this personally, but this is what the liberty side of things does. And I really appreciated that. Thank you so much, Derek, for doing the show. This has been great. One more thing before we go. End the Fed, end the wars, end the empire. Let's go. Peace, love, and liberty, y'all. Thank you very much, Derek.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely, man.